I am Fernanda Knight. I am 35. At Christmas dinner last year, my mother smiled like she had finally won. She looked down the table and smirked. We finally sold Grandma's house. You were never in the will anyway. My younger sister Chloe laughed right on cue. Good, she would have just wasted it. I took a sip of my wine and looked at both of them. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just set my glass down and said, "Cool. Hope you enjoy the cash since I am the one who bought it." The entire table went silent. Before I tell you how I legally outplayed my own family, please take a moment to like and subscribe to QT Told Stories. Also, drop your age in the comments. I would love to know who is listening tonight. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday in October. It was raining in Portland, Oregon. I was sitting in my high-rise office, looking out at the gray skyline. I work as a senior commercial wealth manager. I handle trusts, asset liquidations, and complex estate transfers for high-net-worth clients. I track money for a living. I know exactly how paper moves. My family never cared about my career. They preferred my younger sister Chloe, who ran a mediocre lifestyle blog and married a man with a loud laugh and high credit card debt. At exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, my inbox chimed. An email arrived from my mother, Brenda. The subject line read, "Helen Estate, final copy, do not forward." The attached document was a thick PDF file. The body of the email was brief. "Hey, Chloe, I just got the finalized probate documents from the lawyer. Everything is in our names. Nanda is out. Make sure you delete this after you read it." Brenda hit the autofill on her recipient line. She typed the letter F and hit enter, sending the message to my email address instead of Chloe. I opened the PDF. Page 4 outlined the primary division of assets. My grandmother Helen owned a beautiful property in Bend, Oregon. It was a custom cedar house sitting on a half-acre overlooking the pine trees. The legal document explicitly named Brenda and Chloe as the sole beneficiaries of the estate. My name was missing. I did not break down in tears. I did not pick up my phone to scream at my mother. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and did the math. Over the last 2 years of my grandmother's life, her dementia progressed rapidly. I drove from Portland to Bend 41 times. I sacrificed 41 weekends bathing her, organizing her daily medication, and paying her utility bills out of my own pocket. Chloe drove to Bend 0 times. She was busy planning a destination vacation to Cancun. My mother visited twice. During both of those visits, she complained endlessly about the smell of the living room. During one of those 2 visits, she must have brought a notary public to alter the will. I clicked download and saved the probate file to an encrypted folder on my secure hard drive. I knew the house was fully paid off. I saw the original deed years ago. But now Brenda and Chloe held the legal rights. 10 minutes later, my mobile phone lit up on my desk. The caller identification showed Brenda. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice flat and professional. "Hello, Mom," I said. She sounded incredibly tired. She deployed the practiced exhaustion she always uses when she is about to ask for a favor. "Nanda, honey," she sighed heavily. "I just got off the phone with the estate lawyer. It is such a complicated mess. Grandma left so much hidden debt. We are going to have to figure out how to pay off these creditors before the bank forecloses and takes the house." She was lying through her teeth. I was looking right at a verified balance sheet on my monitor that showed 0 encumbrances and a free and clear title. She was deliberately laying the groundwork to hide the impending sale. If she convinced me the house was underwater, I would not ask any questions when they suddenly sold it. I did not interrupt her. I let her talk for 4 uninterrupted minutes about how stressed and overwhelmed she felt. She sighed again and asked if I could drive down to Bend this weekend to help clear out the heavy medical equipment. She claimed she simply could not bear to look at it. I told her I would be there on Saturday. I hung up the phone. I knew they wanted to liquidate the asset quickly. They wanted a fast and quiet cash grab. I just needed to see the exact real estate strategy they planned to use. They assumed I was a naive daughter who would haul heavy boxes and ask no questions. They forgot what I do for a living. I closed my laptop and booked a hotel in Bend for the weekend. The board was set. I just needed to let them make the first move. The drive from Portland to Bend takes roughly 3 hours if you clear the Mount Hood Pass before the morning traffic. I left my apartment at 5 in the morning on Saturday. I wanted to arrive early. I knew the physical labor waiting for me inside my grandmother's house would require time. When I pulled into the driveway, the property sat quiet under the pine trees. The house featured custom cedar siding and a wraparound deck overlooking a gentle slope. In the current Central Oregon real estate market, a half-acre lot in this specific zip code is highly sought after. I ran the comparable sales on my office terminal on Friday. Similar properties were closing near $850,000. The dirt alone held significant equity. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air still carried the faint clinical scent of antiseptic wipes and oxygen tubing. For 2 years, this living room served as a makeshift hospice ward. I rolled up my sleeves and started breaking down the heavy metal frame of the rented hospital bed. I gathered the spare oxygen concentrators, the sealed boxes of sterile gauze, and the aluminum walker. I carried the items out to my trunk, box by box. My shoulders ached. My hands were covered in dust. Brenda arrived at 10:30. She pulled her sedan into the driveway and stepped out wearing pristine white slacks and a cashmere cardigan. She held a fresh cup of artisan coffee in one hand. She did not offer to carry a single box. She walked through the front door and sighed loudly. She placed a hand over her chest, practicing the posture of a grieving daughter. It is just so much Nanda. She shook her head and looked around the living room. I do not know how we are going to handle all of this. The estate lawyer called me again yesterday. The creditors are circling. Grandma took out a second mortgage we did not know about. She looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I nodded, slowly. I let her fill the silence. The roof alone is a disaster, she continued. The whole foundation might be compromised. I had to call a contractor to come look at it today. We have to know how bad the damage is before the bank forecloses. A vehicle pulled into the driveway behind her sedan. It was a late-model Lexus crossover polished to a mirror shine. A man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 40s. He wore dark denim, a crisp button-down shirt, and leather loafers. He carried a leather-bound portfolio. Brenda walked out to the porch to greet him. Nanda, she called back over her shoulder, come meet Greg. He is the roof contractor I told you about. I stepped onto the porch and extended my hand. Greg offered a firm handshake. He smiled, showing exceptionally white teeth. He did not have calluses on his palms. Men who spend 10 hours a day hauling asphalt shingles up aluminum ladders possess hands that tell the story of their trade. Greg had the hands of a man who typed emails and signed contracts. He walked past me into the house, looking up at the ceiling joists. Boy, you have a real situation here, he said. His tone lacked the specific technical vocabulary of a structural worker. He pointed vaguely at the drywall near the chimney. You have moisture intrusion. The load-bearing integrity is questionable. We are going to have to do a deep evaluation. Brenda crossed her arms and looked at me with wide, worried eyes. See, I told you it was bad. I watched Greg lower his arm. As he shifted his weight, his leather portfolio angled toward the light pouring through the window. The cover featured a faint embossed logo, 2 overlapping mountain peaks above a serif font, Deschutes Peak Brokerage. My daily work involves scrutinizing corporate disclosures and vetting asset managers. Due diligence is not just my job, it is my reflex. I recognize luxury real estate branding when I see it. I smiled at both of them. Let me make us a pot of coffee, I said. You two can keep looking around. I will be right back. I walked into the kitchen and closed the door behind me. I set a filter in the coffee machine and poured the water. While the machine brewed, I stood by the window overlooking the driveway. The Lexus was parked at an angle, giving me a clear view of the license plate. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not need a private investigator. Oregon real estate licenses are a matter of public record. I opened the state regulatory agency database and typed the license plate into a reverse lookup tool I use for asset verification. The search returned a vehicle registration for Gregory Pierce. I opened a new browser tab and searched his name alongside the words Deschutes Peak Brokerage. His professional headshot loaded instantly. Gregory Pierce was a premier listing agent. His online biography boasted a record of moving high-end properties in under 30 days. He specialized in all-cash buyers and off-market transactions. My mother had not brought a roof contractor to evaluate a crumbling house. She had brought a shark to price a hidden gold mine. They were actively preparing to list the property on the open market. Brenda was feeding me a fabricated story about foreclosure to ensure I walked away quietly without asking for my share of the equity. The coffee machine beeped. I poured 3 mugs and carried them back into the living room. Greg was standing by the fireplace tapping the brick with a pen. He was not checking for structural weakness. He was calculating the cost of staging the room. I handed them their mugs. "Thank you for coming out on a Saturday, Greg," I said, keeping my voice warm and steady. "My mother is right. The roof looks terrible. I can see the moisture damage from here. Do whatever you need to do to fix it." Brenda let out a visible breath. Her shoulders dropped an inch. She thought she had won. She believed I bought the lie. She assumed my agreement meant I would step aside and let her handle the burdensome estate. We chatted for another 10 minutes. I played the part of the compliant, supportive daughter. I agreed the house was a financial sinkhole. I told Brenda she was brave for taking on such a stressful project. When Greg finished his assessment and left, I packed the last of the medical supplies into my car. I hugged my mother in the driveway. "Let me know if you need me to haul away any more trash," I told her. "I will, honey," she replied, patting my arm. "Drive safe." I pulled out of the driveway and headed back toward the highway. I did not feel angry. Anger implies a loss of control. I felt the sharp, cold focus of a professional evaluating a hostile takeover. Brenda and Chloe were moving fast to turn the house into liquid capital. They needed an empty house and a quiet exit. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, right up until the moment I took it all away. My phone buzzed in the cup holder as I merged onto Highway 26. The screen displayed a text message from Marcus. Marcus is Chloe's husband. He is an African-American man in his late 30s who runs a regional logistics startup. He is always pitching the next big expansion. He is always one signature away from securing major capital. He drives cars he leases and wears watches he finances. I tapped the screen to read the preview while keeping my eyes on the road. "Hey Nanda," the text read. "Hope the drive to Bend was not too bad. Chloe and I were hoping we could grab dinner with you on Tuesday in Portland. We need to talk to you about a financial favor. Let me know if 8 works." I kept my hands on the steering wheel. The timing was too precise. Brenda was securing the realtor in Bend, while Marcus was setting up a meeting in Portland to ask for a favor. They were coordinating. They were spending money they did not have, yet anticipating the windfall from the secret sale. I pressed the voice command button on my steering wheel. "Reply to Marcus," I said to the empty car. "Tuesday at 8 works fine. See you then. Send." The message vanished from the screen. The trap was forming, and they were walking right into it. Tuesday at 8 arrived with a cold drizzle, characteristic of Portland in autumn. I chose to walk the 4 blocks from my office to the Pearl District restaurant Marcus suggested. The establishment sat firmly in the mid-scale category. They served farm-to-table plates and printed their menus on recycled cardstock. It was the kind of place that signaled financial comfort without screaming extravagance. I handed my damp coat to the hostess and spotted them in a corner booth. Chloe wore a silk blouse that photographed well for her social media feeds. She spent her days curating a digital aesthetic of effortless domestic bliss. Her posts generated modest ad revenue, but required an expensive reality to maintain. Marcus sat beside her, checking his phone. He wore a tailored blazer over a crisp dark tee. His wrist caught the ambient light displaying a heavy metallic watch. I knew his startup focused on regional last-mile logistics. It was a capital-intensive industry built on tight margins and high overhead. I slid into the booth opposite them. Chloe offered a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. Marcus locked his phone screen and slid it face down onto the table. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the reclaimed wood surface. He adopted the serious posture of a man carrying a heavy burden. "Thank you for coming, Nanda," he said. His voice carried a manufactured, somber tone. "I know you work long hours." I picked up the water glass the waiter had already filled. "I do not mind," I replied, taking a sip. "What did you two want to discuss?" Chloe sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We did not want to bother you with this. We really tried to handle it ourselves, but things are getting difficult." Marcus nodded, tracing the condensation on his water glass. "The logistics sector is brutal right now. Fuel costs are eating our margins, and a major client delayed their invoice payment. We are facing a severe cash flow bottleneck. It is temporary, but the timing is terrible." I maintained a neutral expression. I manage wealth portfolios spanning multiple industries. I understand supply chain economics. I also understand when someone is reciting a rehearsed narrative. "How severe is the bottleneck?" I asked. "We need a bridge," he stated, "just to get through the next quarter. The bank is offering a business line of credit, but my personal debt-to-income ratio is currently skewed. I put a lot of personal capital into the warehouse expansion last year. We need a guarantor, a co-signer." Chloe reached across the table and placed her manicured hand over mine. "We are drowning, Nanda. The credit cards are maxed out. We have zero safety net left. We are asking you to co-sign a $50,000 loan. It is just a formality. The business will pay the installments. You will never have to spend a dime." I looked at her hand resting on mine. I looked at the earnest, desperate expression she modeled. My sister was asking me to assume $500,000 of liability. She claimed they were destitute. She claimed they had no safety net. I knew the truth. Their safety net was currently sitting in Bend, Oregon, sporting fresh drywall and a newly hired listing agent. A waiter approached our table holding a leather-bound beverage menu. "Good evening," the waiter said. "Can I get you started with something from the cellar?" Marcus did not hesitate. "We will take the Napa Valley Cabernet," he instructed, handing the menu back. "The Reserve vintage." I had reviewed that specific menu online before walking over. The Reserve Cabernet retailed for $90 a bottle. Marcus had just pleaded absolute poverty. He claimed his credit cards were exhausted, yet he casually ordered a premium bottle of wine on a Tuesday night without glancing at the price column. This micro moment revealed the entire architecture of their scheme. They were not terrified of bankruptcy. They were just impatient. I processed the data rapidly. If you are truly broke, you do not order the Reserve vintage. You order the house red, or you drink water. Marcus was spending money with the confidence of a man who knows a substantial deposit is imminent. He needed $50,000 not to save a dying company, but to float his lifestyle and business expenses until the Deschutes County property closed. They were actively planning to liquidate our grandmother estate without giving me my rightful share. Now they were attempting to use my pristine credit score as a free bridge loan to survive the escrow period. They intended to drain my financial standing while simultaneously stealing my inheritance. The audacity required to execute this maneuver was almost impressive. The waiter returned and presented the bottle. He uncorked it and poured a splash for Marcus to taste. Marcus swirled the dark liquid, sniffed it, and nodded his approval. The waiter filled our 3 glasses and departed. I picked up my glass and admired the rich color. I did not take a sip. I set it back down precisely in the center of my coaster. "I appreciate you sharing the situation with me, Marcus," I said. My voice remained steady and clinical. "I know asking for capital is never easy. However, I have a strict personal policy. I do not co-sign debt. Not for friends and not for family. It violates the core principles I advise my own clients to follow." The practiced sadness vanished from Chloe's face. Her features hardened into genuine irritation. "Nanda, we are family. We are telling you we are broke. This is an emergency." "If it is a true emergency, you need a structural solution," I replied. "A cosigner only treats the symptom of bad cash flow. It does not cure the underlying operational flaw. I will not sign the loan application. But I am willing to offer you something more valuable." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" "My professional expertise," I said. "Send me your profit and loss statements for the trailing 12 months. Send me your accounts receivable aging report. I will audit your business plan for free and help you identify where you are bleeding capital. We can restructure your debt without needing an external guarantor. To a grifter, An offer of an audit is a direct insult. It means the Mark is not blindly handing over the cash. It means the Mark wants to look under the hood. Marcus clenched his jaw, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He reached for his wine glass and took a large swallow. I do not need a consultant, Nanda. I know how to run my company. I just need a signature. I cannot provide that, I stated. I picked up my purse and slid out of the booth. I placed a $20 bill on the table to cover my untouched water and the fraction of time I occupied the seat. I will wait for those financial statements. Enjoy the wine. I turned and walked out of the restaurant into the cold Portland rain. I did not look back. I knew they were sitting in the booth fuming at my refusal. They assumed I was just being stingy. They had no idea I was mapping their exact financial timeline. They needed cash immediately. That meant they were going to price the Bend property aggressively to attract a fast buyer. I walked the 4 blocks back to my apartment. The rain soaked through my jacket, but my mind was occupied with numbers and legal strategies. I unlocked my door, hung my wet coat in the hall, and walked straight to my home office. I booted up my secure terminal. I opened my browser and navigated to a sophisticated real estate tracking software I use for corporate acquisitions. I entered the exact address of the cedar-wrapped house in Bend. I configured the parameters to monitor multiple listing services, off-market whisper networks, and county deed transfers. I set the notification protocol to send an immediate alert to my primary device the second any data regarding the parcel changed. I verified the tracking script and minimized the window. I went to the kitchen, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and prepared for bed. The trap was dormant, but armed. I just had to wait for Gregory Pierce to hit publish. Sleep did not come easily. I lay in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain hitting the bedroom window. I calculated the estimated timeline. Gregory evaluated the house on Saturday. It took a standard brokerage at least 48 hours to process staging photos and draft the marketing copy. Tuesday night was the logical window for data entry. At exactly 2 a.m, the silence of my apartment was broken by a sharp digital chime. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, casting a harsh blue glow across the ceiling. I sat up, throwing the covers aside. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. The custom Google alert sat at the top of my notification center. The text was stark and undeniable. New listing, active, Deschutes County. I tapped the alert and the brokerage webpage loaded in my mobile browser. The header image displayed a beautifully illuminated shot of the property at twilight. The copy boasted about pristine cedar siding and a motivated seller. I scrolled down to the financial details. The asking price sat in bold black font, $850,000. Brenda and Chloe were officially putting my inheritance on the open market. They thought they were selling it to a stranger to solve their impending bankruptcy. They were about to learn a very hard lesson about supply and demand. The digital chime of my phone cut through the quiet dark of my bedroom. The screen illuminated the ceiling with a cold blue glow. It was 2 a.m. I reached for the device and unlocked the interface. The custom tracking alert I configured earlier sat at the top of my notifications. The text was brief and definitive. New listing, active, Deschutes County. I left the bed and walked down the hallway to my home office. The hardwood floor chilled my bare feet, but my focus remained entirely on the task. I sat at my dual-monitor workstation and brought up the Deschutes Peak brokerage portal. Gregory Pierce moved with the rapid efficiency of a broker eager to secure a commission. He bypassed the standard grace period and pushed the property onto the open market under the cover of night. The header image glowed on my large screen. The photographer utilized a wide-angle lens and drone lighting to capture the exterior at twilight. The asking price rested in bold black font near the top right corner, $850,000. I clicked through the high-resolution gallery. The visual data hit me in a steady, calculated rhythm. My family did not merely place my inheritance on the market. They sanitized the entire environment. They erased 3 decades of my grandmother living within those walls. Helen preferred a specific aesthetic. Her home was a sanctuary of patterned textiles and mismatched ceramic lamps. She kept woven rugs on the floors that showed the natural traffic of a fulfilling life. Her space possessed warmth and a deep sense of history. Gregory and his staging crew eradicated all of it. The photographs revealed a sterile environment filled with gray rental sofas and beige accent chairs. Clear acrylic coffee tables replaced the sturdy oak furniture Helen treasured. The hardwood floors appeared stripped and polished to an unnatural museum shine. They transformed a deeply personal family estate into a generic luxury commodity designed to appeal to a broad demographic. I pressed the right arrow key on my keyboard. The system loaded image 12. It was a wide shot of the living room fireplace. My breath hitched. I stared at the mantelpiece above the brick hearth. For my entire life, a specific object anchored that room. My late grandfather carved a clock out of a single block of raw cedar. He spent months shaping the wood and sanding the edges until they felt like silk. He installed a brass mechanical movement inside. The clock chimed every hour, serving as the steady heartbeat of the house. Helen cherished that item above all other possessions. She polished the cedar every Sunday afternoon. In image 12, the cedar clock was gone. In its place hung a large square canvas covered in pale blue geometric shapes. It was a piece of factory-produced art purchased in bulk by staging companies. They discarded her aesthetic preferences and pawned her memories. The realization settled over me like a heavy winter frost. Brenda and Chloe viewed our heritage as an inconvenient obstacle. The missing clock proved they possessed zero reverence for the woman who built that home. They only cared about the wire transfer waiting at the end of the escrow period. Up until this moment, a small residual fraction of my mind hoped they might show a shred of hesitation. I thought perhaps the reality of selling the family estate might slow their greed. The cheap blue canvas proved otherwise. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I needed a flawless strategy. My initial instinct leaned toward litigation. I could walk into the county courthouse tomorrow morning and file a formal partition lawsuit. As a direct descendant, I held the legal standing to contest the probate documents Brenda filed. A judge would freeze the asset, the listing would be pulled from the market, but I play the long game for a living. I ran a mental risk assessment on a standard partition action. Lawsuits constitute public record. The moment I filed the paperwork, Brenda and Marcus would know I caught them. A cornered animal fights back. They would hire their own legal counsel using high-interest credit cards or predatory loans. The court process would drag on for 2 or 3 years. The house would sit empty, accumulating property taxes and degrading in the harsh Central Oregon winters. The only people who win in a protracted probate dispute are the litigators billing hourly. I did not want a messy, prolonged war of attrition. I wanted a clean, surgical strike. If my mother and sister desired a wealthy, anonymous stranger to hand them an exorbitant amount of cash, I would simply become that stranger. I would let them proceed with their scheme. I would encourage their greed. I would purchase my own inheritance using an untraceable corporate vehicle. Once they were legally bound to my terms, I would spring the trap. The battlefield shifted from an emotional family dispute to a tactical corporate acquisition. I checked the digital clock on my desktop. It was 2:45 in the morning. I closed the browser window and returned to bed. My mind felt quiet and organized. The path forward was clear. At 8 o'clock the following morning, I walked into my Portland office building. I bypassed the corporate break room and went straight to my desk. I picked up my encrypted mobile device and dialed a Seattle area code. The man who answered is named David. He serves as my primary corporate real estate attorney. We met 6 years ago during a complex commercial merger involving a downtown high-rise. David specializes in shielding high-net-worth individuals from public scrutiny. He constructs legal fortresses out of paperwork. "Good morning, Fernanda," he said. His voice carried the sharp cadence of a man already on his 3rd cup of espresso. "What kind of fire are we putting out today?" "No fires, David," I replied. "I am initiating an acquisition. I need you to draft a blind trust and a single-member Delaware limited liability company by the end of the business day. I need expedited filing." Delaware represents the gold standard for corporate anonymity. Unlike Oregon, the state of Delaware does not require the names of managing members or directors to be listed on public franchise tax reports. An LLC formed there acts as an impenetrable shield. Anyone searching the state database will only see the name of the registered agent. David typed something on his keyboard. A blind acquisition, he noted. What is the target asset? A residential property in Deschutes County, I said. The list price is $850,000. I will be submitting an all-cash offer. I need the operating agreement to explicitly grant me unilateral control over all purchasing decisions without my name ever appearing on the public purchase and sale agreement. The seller cannot know who is funding the escrow account. Understood, he said. Do you have a name for the entity? I looked out my office window at the gray clouds rolling over the Willamette River. Call it Apex Holdings, LLC. I will have the draft documents in your secure portal by 3 this afternoon, David confirmed. We will use my firm as the registered agent to maintain the separation. You will be invisible. Thank you, David. Send me the invoice. I disconnected the call. The corporate machinery was officially in motion. Apex Holdings, LLC was no longer just an idea. It was a weapon, forming in the hands of a skilled attorney. By sunset, I would possess the legal camouflage necessary to approach Gregory Pierce and submit an offer Brenda could not refuse. The week progressed. I monitored the listing analytics using a back-end real estate portal. The property received significant digital traffic. The sleek staging and the aggressive marketing push generated multiple showings. I knew I had to strike quickly before a legitimate buyer entered the arena. Thursday morning arrived crisp and bright. Thanksgiving was exactly 1 week away. Traditionally, my family gathered at the house Brenda owned in the suburbs. Helen used to sit at the head of the table dispensing warm rolls and dry humor. The holiday held profound sentimental value for me. My phone vibrated on the polished surface of my desk. A new text message illuminated the screen. It was from Brenda. I picked up the device and read the paragraph. Nanda, honey, I am so sorry to do this. I just cannot host Thanksgiving this year. The grief over losing Grandma is hitting me in waves. I am too overwhelmed and depressed to even think about cooking a turkey or entertaining. I need a quiet day alone to process my feelings. I hope you understand. We will do something for Christmas instead. I read the words twice. The manipulation was layered and precise. She utilized the universal shield of grief to preempt any pushback. If I complained, I would appear insensitive to a mourning daughter. But I already knew the truth. Marcus bragged at the restaurant about securing capital. Chloe posted pictures of expensive wine selections on her social media feeds. They were not mourning. They were preparing to celebrate. Brenda iced me out of the holiday so they could host a private victory party. They intended to toast to their impending wealth without the awkward presence of the daughter they actively defrauded. I placed the phone back down. I did not feel the sting of rejection. Rejection implies a desire to belong to their circle. I only felt the cold satisfaction of confirming their true nature. I typed a brief reply. I understand, Mom. Take all the time you need. Drink some tea and rest. Happy Thanksgiving. I hit send. She believed she cleverly removed me from the board. She thought she isolated me. In reality, she just handed me the uninterrupted time I needed to finalize the purchase agreement. I opened the secure portal and downloaded the finished operating documents for Apex Holdings. I reviewed the clauses. David executed the instructions perfectly. I was a ghost. I dialed David again. The documents are approved, I told him. Let us draft the offer. We are going in strong. 30,000 over asking, 0 contingencies regarding financing, a 21-day closing window. I want them blinded by the cash. David chuckled. A 21-day close on a clean cash offer. They will sign it before they even read the fine print. That is exactly what I am counting on, I replied. Submit the bid. The tactical warfare officially began. They wanted a fast, lucrative exit. I was about to give them a golden cage. By Friday morning, the paperwork for Apex Holdings LLC cleared the state registry. David forwarded the digital seal and corporate certificates to my private portal. With the legal shield firmly established, I initiated the next phase of the acquisition. I did not use a standard residential agent. Local real estate circles are small, and gossip travels quickly. Instead, I retained a high-end commercial acquisition broker based out of Seattle named Robert. He was accustomed to dealing with anonymous institutional funds, corporate restructuring, and non-disclosure agreements. I instructed Robert to draft the purchase and sale agreement with lethal precision. We structured an all-cash offer of $880,000. This figure sat exactly $30,000 above the asking price Gregory Pierce had set. In the modern American real estate landscape, an all-cash offer above list price with no financing contingencies acts as a financial battering ram. It bypasses appraisal hurdles, eliminates lender delays, and signals absolute certainty to a seller. But the true teeth of the offer resided in the strict behavioral addendums. The contract dictated a lightning-fast 21-day closing window. It explicitly stipulated that the sellers would have zero contact with the buyer, communicating exclusively through Robert Brokerage. Furthermore, a comprehensive confidentiality clause bound all parties. If Brenda or Chloe attempted to breach the anonymity wrap or investigate the background of Apex Holdings, LLC, the contract automatically voided and the sellers would be liable for severe financial damages. Robert submitted the digital contract packet to Gregory Pierce on Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. I sat at my wealth management terminal in Portland sipping cold espresso and tracking the metadata of the document link. I knew how my mother operated under financial pressure. When you are drowning in debt and pretending to be independently wealthy, a massive influx of liquidity looks like a life raft. You do not check the material composition of the raft. You simply climb aboard. At 5:12 p.m., the status tracker flipped from sent to viewed. Less than 20 minutes later, the notification turned green. Signed. Brenda did not even wait to consult an independent estate attorney. She was so thoroughly blinded by the above-market cash value that she grabbed her digital pen and authorized the contract. She completely bypassed standard legal review, eager to secure the funds before the phantom corporate buyer changed their mind. She had no idea that by signing so rapidly, she accepted every single punitive addendum I baked into the fine print. I watched the final digital certificates execute on my monitor. The ink was dry. I had successfully bound my own family to an ironclad legal contract where I held every single ounce of systemic leverage. They believed they were slick operators pulling off a secret multi-$100,000 heist behind my back. In reality, they just signed the lease on their own trap. But a real estate transaction under American property law is never finalized at the mere signing of a contract. The escrow process demands due diligence. While financing was a non-issue, my contract explicitly mandated a comprehensive, independent structural evaluation. If I was going to purchase my grandmother's house, I required a full diagnostic report on exactly what Brenda had done to the property during her brief period of stewardship. I hired a premier licensed property inspector from Eugene, ensuring he had zero ties to the Deschutes County brokerage networks. I gave him specific instructions to examine the subflooring, the attic ventilation, and the foundational integrity behind the fresh paint Gregory Pierce had ordered. The inspector conducted his on-site evaluation on Monday morning. I spent that day managing the investment portfolio of a local manufacturing firm, keeping my mind anchored in standard corporate metrics. I did not text Brenda. I did not check Chloe's social media. I maintained absolute radio silence. At 4:30 p.m., my encrypted phone buzzed. It was a direct, secure message from the inspector. Attached was a preliminary photographic brief and a 3-page addendum that caused my wealth management training to kick into overdrive. The inspector text was concise. Ms. Knight, we have a major contractual non-disclosure issue here. The sellers have attempted to falsify the property condition report. I opened the high-resolution images on my terminal. The photographs depicted the basement utility room. This was a space located directly beneath the kitchen, hidden behind a heavy cedar storage partition. Over the weekend, someone had applied a thick, uneven layer of glossy white antimicrobial sealant paint over the lower section of the drywall. It looked clean on the surface, a quick cosmetic fix designed to pass a superficial visual walkthrough. But my inspector utilized an infrared thermal imaging camera and a deep wall moisture probe. The advanced moisture diagnostics revealed the truth beneath the fresh paint. The drywall was rotting from the inside out. A slow, unchecked pipe leak behind the structural frame had saturated the insulation over the past 8 months, creating a massive, toxic black mold infestation. The thermal scans showed dense, spreading plumes of fungal growth climbing up the inner wood studs toward the main floor joists. It was a severe environmental hazard that would require immediate commercial remediation, costing tens of thousands of dollars to safely dismantle and replace. More importantly, it constituted an explicit act of real estate fraud. Oregon disclosure statutes are incredibly strict. A seller cannot actively conceal a known material defect to induce a buyer into purchasing a property. Brenda and Chloe clearly discovered the mold during their hasty staging prep. Instead of remediating it properly, they chose to buy a $30 can of paint, mask the decay, and pass the toxic liability onto a faceless corporate buyer. They thought an anonymous out-of-state LLC would close escrow without looking behind the basement partition. They assumed their little cover-up would remain buried until the checks cleared and they vanished with the cash. I leaned forward, the glow of the mold scans reflecting in my eyes. The layers of deception were piling up faster than I anticipated. My mother and sister were not just cutting me out of my grandmother will. They were actively engaging in criminal non-disclosure to protect their payday. They were running a fraudulent operation on the very ground Helen had blessed with her love. I didn't feel a surge of panic. In my line of work, a discovered fraud is not a crisis. It is a massive piece of transactional leverage. Brenda had just handed me a legal whip, and she had no idea I was already raising my arm to strike. I closed the inspection folder and drafted an urgent message to David, my corporate attorney. The escrow period was about to become an absolute nightmare for the sellers. I needed him to prepare a formal legal notice that would push Brenda financial anxiety to the absolute brink. The trap was locked, and the walls were starting to close in on them. The escrow clock started ticking on Monday. The title company opened the preliminary file and began running the standard public record checks. My attorney David sent the formal notice of the mold discovery to Gregory Pierce on Tuesday morning. I instructed David to hold the demand for a financial concession for a few days. Let the anxiety simmer in their minds. Let them sweat over the potential loss of the lucrative deal before dropping the hammer. While the paperwork crawled through the bureaucratic channels, I maintained my normal professional routine. I analyze wealth for a living. I know how to detach emotion from a transaction and focus on the numbers. I left my office building on Thursday for my scheduled lunch hour. The Oregon rain had stopped, leaving the downtown Portland streets slick and reflective under the gray sky. I walked down a specific stretch of avenues known for high-end boutiques and estate liquidators. This district catered to established wealth. It was a place where old money quietly traded hands without drawing attention. I liked walking through this neighborhood to gauge market trends in physical assets. Art and antiques often signal economic shifts before the stock market catches up. I paused outside a shop specializing in Pacific Northwest heritage pieces. The window display featured early century woodwork and brass maritime instruments. My eyes scanned the carefully curated arrangement and stopped dead on a wooden object resting on a dark velvet pedestal. It was a carved block of raw cedar. A brass mechanical movement sat perfectly centered within the polished grain. I recognized the slight imperfection on the lower left corner, where my grandfather had applied a fraction too much pressure with his sander decades ago. It was Helen's cedar clock, the one missing from the Zillow listing photos, the one replaced by the cheap blue canvas. I stared through the thick storefront glass. The air in my lungs turned cold. My sister had not merely thrown the clock into a storage bin to clear space for the staging crew. She had driven it 3 hours north to Portland to pawn it for rapid liquidity. The sheer audacity required to execute that move was staggering. The real estate purchase agreement Robert drafted explicitly included all fixtures and major decor present in the home at the time of signing. The contract bound the contents of the house to Apex Holdings, LLC. By removing and selling the item, Chloe committed theft during an active escrow period. I pushed the heavy glass door open. A brass bell chimed overhead, signaling my entry. The shop owner stood behind a polished glass counter. He was an older man, wearing a tailored tweed vest and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up from a leather-bound ledger and offered a polite nod. I walked straight to the window display and pointed at the cedar clock. "How much?" I asked. My voice held the flat, uncompromising tone of a serious corporate buyer. $1,200, the dealer replied, stepping out from behind his counter. It is a stunning piece of regional folk art. The mechanical movement is flawless. I just acquired it yesterday from a private seller. I pulled my heavy metal corporate credit card from my wallet and set it on the glass counter. "I will take it," I said. "I also require the provenance documentation for my insurance records. I need a detailed receipt, including the full name of the individual who sold it to you." The dealer hesitated, tapping his pen against the ledger. I usually keep my sourcing confidential to protect my clients. I looked him directly in the eye. I am paying the full asking price without negotiation. I need the origin record to verify the chain of custody. It is non-negotiable. If you cannot provide the documentation, I will take my business elsewhere. He looked at the premium credit card resting on his counter. He walked back to his register, typed on his keyboard, and printed a detailed invoice. I read the ink on the paper. The seller was listed as Chloe Knight. The date of transaction was Wednesday. She sold an item that legally belonged to my corporation. The dealer wrapped the cedar block in heavy tissue paper and placed it in a structured carrying bag. I walked back to my apartment instead of returning to the wealth management firm. I took the clock out of the bag and set it on my kitchen island. I ran my fingers over the sanded wood. Helen loved this object. She cherished the history it represented. Chloe sold it for pocket change. I found a secure archival box in my hallway storage closet. I placed the clock inside, along with the printed receipt bearing my sister's signature. I sealed the box and placed it on the top shelf. It sat there as a quiet talisman of my impending victory. I possessed undeniable, documented proof of a contract violation. I possessed the legal high ground. I sat at my kitchen counter and considered the timeline. Chloe drove to Portland on Wednesday to pawn a family heirloom. Why did she need a few $100s of immediate liquid cash when she was expecting a 6-figure wire transfer in a matter of weeks? The math felt misaligned. People anticipating a substantial windfall usually float their daily expenses on credit. They do not hawk sentimental woodwork unless they require immediate physical cash for a transaction they cannot finance. I opened the social media application on my phone. I navigated to the public profile page belonging to Marcus. He maintained a highly curated account to project an image of success for his logistics startup. His timeline loaded on my screen. The newest post sat at the top of the grid, published just 3 hours ago. The image displayed Marcus standing in a luxury dealership lot. He held a silver key fob up to the camera lens. Behind him sat a brand new German sport utility vehicle, gleaming under the showroom lights. The caption read, "Upgrades for the new quarter, big things coming. Thankful for new blessings." The pieces snapped together with sharp precision. They were spending the house money before they legally possessed it. Marcus lacked the credit score to secure a loan without a cosigner. I refused to sign his paperwork at the restaurant. He needed liquid cash for the dealership down payment. That is why Chloe pawned the clock. They used the stolen funds to cover the drive-off fees for a vehicle they could not afford. The financial vice they built for themselves was tightening. They were over-leveraged and acting with reckless impunity. The tension was escalating perfectly. My attorney was holding a drafted notice regarding the mold. I was holding a receipt proving theft. The trap was armed. The weekend passed with the cedar clock sitting silently in my hallway closet. On Monday morning, I authorized my broker, Robert, to transmit the official property inspection report to Gregory Pierce. The document spanned 47 pages. It contained detailed thermal imaging scans, moisture probe statistics, and a full environmental hazard assessment of the basement drywall. The data proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that a severe fungal infestation existed and that someone had recently applied cosmetic paint to hide the decay. In the commercial wealth sector, we observe how people react when their deceptions are illuminated. Novices panic and make unforced errors. Veterans hire legal counsel and remain quiet. Brenda and Chloe were novices, playing a high-stakes financial game. At 11:15 that morning, Robert forwarded me an email thread. The subject line read, "Confidential Settlement Inquiry." Gregory Pierce had sent the message to Robert, attempting to broker a quiet resolution. Gregory was a shark, but he was driven by his commission. If the deal fell apart, he earned nothing. To save his payout, he forwarded a direct written communication from my mother to demonstrate his client was willing to negotiate. Brenda had typed the original message from her personal email account. I read her exact words on my monitor. "Gregory, you have to fix this. We cannot afford to repair a leak right now. Tell the buyer agent we will give them $5,000 in a private cash envelope after closing if they delete the basement section from the final record. Just make it go away." I stared at the glowing pixels. My mother put a bribery attempt in writing. She propositioned a licensed real estate professional to doctor a legally binding environmental disclosure. She transmitted this request over an unencrypted server, creating a permanent digital trail. I picked up my secure phone and dialed my attorney. David answered on the first ring. "I have a written bribe from the seller," I told him. "They offered my broker illicit cash to alter the inspection findings." David let out a sharp breath. "They documented their own intent to commit fraud. That is remarkably foolish. How do you want to proceed, Fernanda?" "We dropped the hammer," I said. "Draft a formal addendum to the purchase agreement. Apex Holdings requires a strict $60,000 seller concession. The funds must be held in a specialized escrow account, specifically designated for professional biohazard remediation. Include a clause stating that if they reject this concession, we terminate the transaction immediately." I paused, looking at the Portland skyline through my office window. "Add one more provision, David. Inform them that if they refuse the concession and we walk away, we are legally obligated to report the toxic mold discovery to the Oregon Health Authority and the Regional Housing Registry." David chuckled a low, precise sound. "You are cornering them. If we report the environmental hazard, that house becomes a toxic asset. They will never be able to sell it to anyone else without spending the money up front to fix it." "Exactly," I replied. "Send the addendum, give them 4 hours to sign." Robert transmitted the legal ultimatum to Gregory at noon. The terms were draconian, but mathematically flawless. Brenda and Chloe expected an $880,000 payday. I was slicing $60,000 straight off the top of their net profit. I knew their exact financial posture. They possessed zero leverage. Just a few days prior, Marcus drove a brand-new German sport utility vehicle off a dealership lot. Chloe hawked a priceless family heirloom for a fraction of its worth, just to cover the initial fees. They were floating their extravagant lifestyle on the promise of a fast, clean escrow. If they rejected my addendum, the deal died. If the deal died, Marcus would default on his automotive lease before the end of the month. The logistics startup he ran would face insolvency without the anticipated cash injection. Furthermore, my threat to report the biohazard meant they could not simply put the property back on the market and wait for another naive buyer. The state would flag the address. They were trapped in a vice constructed from their own greed. The 4-hour deadline ticked away. I spent the afternoon reviewing quarterly earnings statements for a corporate client. I did not constantly check my inbox. I understood the psychological weight of a shrinking clock. Desperation operates on a predictable schedule. At 3:45, Robert sent a secure text. "The addendum is signed. The sellers conceded the $60,000. I leaned back in my chair. The operation executed flawlessly. By applying surgical legal pressure, I stripped away a large portion of their illicit profit. I used their own deceit regarding the painted drywall to legally commandeer the funds needed to repair my grandmother home. The beauty of the maneuver lay in its anonymity. They hated Apex Holdings for extorting them, but they had no idea they were surrendering their wealth to the very daughter they tried to erase. The financial blow landed. Now the emotional fallout would commence. At 5:30, I packed my briefcase and took the elevator down to the lobby. The Oregon evening sky was turning the color of bruised iron. I stepped out onto the damp pavement and walked toward my apartment building. My mobile device vibrated in my coat pocket. The screen displayed my mother name. I let it ring 3 times before pressing the green icon. "Hello, Mom." She did not bother with a greeting. Her voice was thick and trembling. "Nanda," she sobbed, "I do not know what I am going to do. I stopped at a crosswalk waiting for the traffic light to change." I kept my tone soft and concerned. "What is wrong? Has something happened?" "It is the estate," she cried. "The lawyer called me again today. He found more hidden liabilities. Grandma had these terrible, secret medical debts we knew nothing about. The creditors are demanding $60,000 immediately. They are threatening to place a lien on everything." I listened to the lie flow from her mouth. She was weeping over a fabricated debt to explain the sudden disappearance of the $60,000 she just signed away to Apex Holdings. She needed to craft a narrative, if she ever told me the final sale price of the house she had, to account for the missing capital. Blaming my deceased grandmother for phantom medical bills served as the perfect cover story. "That sounds incredibly stressful," I said, offering nothing but hollow validation. "I am so sorry you have to carry this burden. It is ruining my health," she continued, sniffing loudly. "Chloe and I are trying to manage it, but the hits just keep coming. We are doing our best to protect the family name. I just needed to hear your voice, honey. I needed some support." I started walking as the crosswalk signal illuminated. She did not call for support. She called to test her lie on a captive audience. She wanted to ensure I bought the narrative of the struggling executor. She sought sympathy from the exact person she was actively defrauding. "You are doing a wonderful job managing the estate, Mom," I told her. "Just take it one day at a time. Do you need me to drive down to Bend and help you sort through the creditor paperwork?" Her breath hitched. The panic flared in her voice. No, do not do that. I have it all organized in my home office. The estate lawyer said we have to keep the files confidential until the probate clears. Just focus on your job, Nanda. I will handle the heavy lifting." "Of course," I replied. "Let me know if the situation changes." I disconnected the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The audacity of her performance was breathtaking. She wept real tears over a fictitious crisis while holding the pen that signed away her own leverage. She thought she was playing a masterful game of deception. She believed she isolated me from the reality of the Deschutes County property. She assumed the anonymous corporate buyer was a ruthless Seattle investment firm taking advantage of a desperate seller. She did not realize the vice was still tightening. The $60,000 penalty was merely the opening salvo. They were spending capital they did not possess, relying on an escrow closing date that I controlled. I reached my apartment building and unlocked the front door. I looked at the hallway closet where the cedar clock rested in the dark. The inspection fraud was resolved. The estate was secured. But Marcus was still planning a warehouse expansion based on funds he would never receive. The dominoes were perfectly aligned. I just needed to initiate the next delay. The $60,000 financial penalty should have functioned as a sobering reality check. In the realm of asset management, a sudden loss of capital usually forces an investor to pause and recalibrate their risk tolerance. Rational individuals tighten their budgets when unforeseen liabilities arise. They cancel luxury purchases and prioritize liquidity. My sister and her husband did not possess a rational relationship with money. Instead of retreating, they accelerated. They viewed the remaining escrow balance not as a finite resource, but as infinite wealth. The deduction I engineered regarding the toxic fungal bloom barely registered as a deterrent. They simply adjusted their mental accounting and continued spending with reckless abandon. This phenomenon occurs frequently among heirs anticipating unearned windfalls. The money does not feel real until it vanishes. I observed their escalating hubris from the quiet perimeter of my daily routine. I did not need to monitor their bank accounts to track their insolvency. They broadcasted their financial exposure publicly. On a crisp Wednesday morning, I walked into an artisanal coffee roaster in the Pearl District. The establishment featured exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors. The air smelled of dark roasted beans and steamed oat milk. I stood near the pickup counter waiting for a standard black drip coffee. The heavy glass door opened. A gust of chilly autumn air swept into the warm cafe. Marcus strolled inside. He wore a tailored wool overcoat layered above a designer turtleneck. He held a leather key fob in his right hand, swinging it casually. The silver emblem of a premium German automotive manufacturer caught the overhead Edison lights. He looked like a man starring in his own personal cinematic montage of success. He stepped up to the register and ordered a complex, customized espresso beverage. He paid with a pristine metallic credit card, dropping a generous tip into the digital jar. As he turned toward the waiting area, his eyes locked onto mine. A brief flash of surprise crossed his features. It quickly morphed into a wide, smug grin. He walked over to my section of the counter. "Nanda," he said, projecting his voice loud enough for the nearby patrons to hear. "Good to see you. I did not expect to run into you down here." I offered a polite, calibrated smile. "Good morning, Marcus. I was just grabbing a quick coffee before heading to the firm." He leaned against the wooden counter, crossing his arms. He positioned his hand so the expensive watch on his wrist remained highly visible. "You look tired," he noted. "The corporate grind must be wearing you down. You should take a vacation. Chloe and I are looking at booking a villa in Cabo for the new year." "That sounds relaxing," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. He nodded, staring out the window at his new sport utility vehicle parked illegally in a loading zone. "Things are moving fast for us. The logistics market is opening up. I just secured a substantial expansion for my company. We are moving out of the old industrial park and taking over a premium facility in the warehouse district. 10,000 square feet of climate-controlled storage." I processed the logistics of his claim. Commercial real estate operates on ruthless parameters. Landlords do not hand over keys to premium industrial facilities without securing heavy financial guarantees. They demand first-month rent, last-month rent, and a hefty security deposit up front. For a 10,000 square foot climate-controlled space in Portland, that initial cashier check would easily exceed $40,000. "That is quite an upgrade," I said. "Commercial leases require significant upfront capital. I am glad you found the funding." Marcus let out a short, condescending laugh. He shook his head and looked at me with an expression bordering on pity. "You should have co-signed that loan, Nanda," he stated. "We are coming into serious capital next month. I could have brought you in on the ground floor. You missed out on a very lucrative return on investment." I did not flinch. I let his arrogance hang in the air between us. He truly believed he possessed superior business acumen. He thought I was a risk-averse coward who failed to recognize a golden opportunity. "When is the grand opening?" I asked, injecting a note of mild curiosity into my voice. "We take possession of the building in a few weeks," he boasted. "The landlord requires the finalized bank wire on December 15th. We get the keys the very same day. We are hosting a catered launch party for our investors shortly after. You should come by and see what real scaling looks like." December 15th. He handed me the exact structural weakness of his entire operation wrapped in a boast. The barista called my name and placed my black coffee on the counter. I picked up the paper cup and turned back to my brother-in-law. "I will mark my calendar, Marcus," I said. "Congratulations on the expansion. Please give my best to Chloe." I walked out of the coffee shop and stepped onto the damp sidewalk. The cold air cleared my lungs. I took a sip of the bitter coffee and smiled. Marcus was executing a fatal operational error. He signed a binding commercial lease agreement based on an escrow timeline he did not control. He believed the Bend property would close in early December, dispensing the funds well before his warehouse deposit deadline. He built a high-stakes bridge out of toothpicks and stood right in the center of it. If the anticipated capital arrived even one day late, his bridge would collapse. The commercial landlord would declare the lease in default. Marcus would forfeit whatever earnest money he scraped together. His logistics company would face immediate eviction from their current, smaller space, if he already gave notice. The resulting cascade of bounced checks and broken contracts would bury him. Their entire financial survival hinged on the Deschutes County property closing before December 15th. I reached my office suite and locked the door behind me. I set my coffee cup on the desk and picked up my secure phone. I dialed my corporate attorney in Seattle. David answered with his usual brisk efficiency. "Good morning, Fernanda. Has the seller returned the amended paperwork for the biohazard remediation?" "They signed it yesterday," I confirmed. "The $60,000 remains locked in the specialized holding account, but we need to initiate a new maneuver. I need to stall the closing process." David paused. "How long of a delay do you require?" "I need the escrow frozen until the 22nd of December, I stated. "I need the timeline pushed past the middle of the month without giving the sellers any legal avenue to terminate the contract. It must look like a standard bureaucratic nightmare." "Let me review the preliminary title report," David said. I can hear his fingers flying across his keyboard. "A cash offer without a lending institution removes many of our usual delay tactics. We cannot blame a slow underwriter. We need a structural issue with the parcel itself." He went quiet for 40 seconds. When he spoke again, his tone held a note of dark amusement. "I found your bottleneck, Fernanda. The property sits on a half-acre lot, but the southern boundary lines up against an old municipal utility easement established in the late 1980s. The original survey markers are outdated." "I understand," I replied. David continued outlining the legal mechanism. As the buyer, Apex Holdings holds the right to demand a modernized, definitive land survey to ensure the utility easement does not encroach upon the primary cedar structure. I will file a formal objection to the current title insurance binder, citing boundary ambiguity. "What is the procedural timeline for that objection?" I asked. "The title company will be forced to halt the escrow clock immediately," David explained. "They must dispatch a licensed municipal surveyor to manually measure and record the property lines. Given the upcoming holiday schedule, securing a surveyor and processing the updated municipal paperwork will add a mandatory 10 to 14-day delay. The sellers cannot fight it because clear title is a contractual prerequisite. Execute the objection, David. Do it today. Consider it done." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the polished wood. Marcus and Chloe were out there purchasing luxury vehicles and signing commercial leases, expecting a seamless transition of wealth. They counted their unhatched chickens and built an entire farm around them. They thought they were holding all the cards. They had no idea someone else owned the casino. The escrow freeze would hit them like a freight train. The title company would send the official delay notification to Gregory Pierce by the end of the week. The panic would set in shortly after. They were about to learn that unearned money is a volatile substance, and timing is the only metric that matters. The board was perfectly arranged for the impending holiday. Thanksgiving Day arrived, wrapped in a shroud of dense, gray Oregon rain. I woke up at 7 in the morning. My apartment felt hollow. The air lacked the customary scent of roasting poultry and baked apples. The television remained dark. I brewed my morning coffee and stood by the glass window looking over the Willamette River. The city appeared dormant beneath the clouds. I thought about the text message my mother sent the previous week. She claimed the grief over my grandmother paralyzed her. She stated she could not bear the thought of entertaining or cooking. She requested strict isolation to process her sorrow. She painted a portrait of a heartbroken woman unable to face a holiday table, missing its matriarch. I knew she lied. I just needed to quantify the scale of the deception. I spent the morning analyzing corporate portfolios and adjusting my clients' tax strategies before the end of the fiscal year. I refused to let their betrayal disrupt my professional productivity. For my holiday meal, I ordered a premium sushi platter from a high-end Japanese restaurant downtown. The delivery driver handed me the sleek black box right at noon. At 2 in the afternoon, I sat at my workstation. I opened a secondary social media account I maintain for background checks on potential vendors. I did not follow Chloe or Marcus directly. That would leave a digital footprint. Instead, I tracked their peripheral network. Chloe possessed a close friend named Jessica, who documented every waking moment of her social calendar. Jessica treated her phone camera like a constant mirror. I navigated to the public profile Jessica managed. A glowing purple ring illuminated her avatar, indicating an active live broadcast. I clicked the icon. The video feed loaded. The screen revealed a sprawling suburban living room. It was the house Marcus and Chloe rented in the suburbs. The space teemed with guests. I counted at least 30 people mingling, holding crystal wine glasses. A professional catering team wearing black uniforms moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of artisan hors d'oeuvres. A carved turkey rested on a central dining table, flanked by elaborate floral centerpieces and silver chafing dishes. This was not a quiet gathering. This was a premier catered event. Hiring a private staff on a major national holiday requires premium hazard pay. They were burning through thousands of dollars. The camera panned across the room. Jessica narrated the event, praising the extravagant setup and the vintage wine selection. Then the lens focused on the center of the room. Marcus tapped a silver spoon against his glass. The ambient chatter quieted. Beside him stood Chloe, wearing a designer silk dress. Next to Chloe stood Brenda. My grieving mother wore a vibrant emerald blouse. Her hair was professionally styled into soft waves. She held a flute of expensive champagne. She did not look depressed. She did not look like a woman mourning the loss of a parent. She looked triumphant. She radiated the specific, arrogant energy of a person who believes they just outsmarted everyone in the room. Marcus handed the floor to her. Brenda raised her glass. "To family," she announced. Her voice carried over the smartphone microphone, clear and sharp. "To closing difficult chapters, and to new beginnings and smart investments." The crowd cheered. They clinked their glasses. Jessica turned the camera back to her own face, smiling and drinking. I watched the screen for another 3 minutes. I observed the unearned joy on their faces. They celebrated a financial victory funded by stolen heritage. They toasted to their impending wealth, while the daughter who spent 41 weekends bathing their benefactor ate takeout alone in a quiet apartment. Any microscopic fragment of residual familial guilt I harbored evaporated in that instant. In the wealth management sector, emotions function as inefficient variables. They cloud judgment and skew risk assessment. I stripped them away. I was now operating purely on cold, hard mathematics. My family viewed me as a disposable resource. They utilized my labor when Helen was dying and discarded me when the assets became liquid. They deserved the exact legal trap I constructed. I picked up my secure mobile device. During my previous conversation with David, we mapped out the boundary line objection. We identified an outdated municipal utility easement from the 1980s. The old survey involved a subterranean water main. If the city ever needed to access that pipe and the property line was incorrect, the municipality possessed the right to tear up the cedar decking without offering compensation. Apex Holdings demanded mathematical certainty regarding the property lines before proceeding with the purchase. David prepared the formal legal filing earlier in the week. I instructed him to hold the final transmission until I gave the explicit green light. Timing functions as a lethal weapon in contract law. A delay notice sent on a Tuesday afternoon allows a real estate broker to troubleshoot. They can call the surveyor. They can call the county clerk. But a delay notice sent on the afternoon of a major national holiday traps the recipient in a bureaucratic void. Banks remain closed. Municipal offices shut down for the long weekend. The seller cannot fix the problem. They can only sit and panic. I opened my encrypted email portal. I drafted a concise message to my attorney. File the boundary objection. Freeze the escrow immediately. I hit send. The legal machinery engaged. The title company utilized an automated digital processing system to manage their files. When a formal objection hits their server, the software automatically generates a suspension notice and distributes it to all primary stakeholders. The system does not care that it is a holiday. It only cares about protecting the chain of title. The sun began to set over Portland. casting long gray shadows across my home office. I ate my sushi. I drank my green tea. I visualized the exact moment the notification would arrive at that catered party. I understood the mechanics of the impending delay. A title insurer will never issue a clear policy if a property boundary is actively contested. No title policy means no closing. The title company would be forced to halt the escrow clock. They must dispatch a licensed municipal surveyor to manually measure and record the lines. Given the holiday schedule, securing a surveyor and processing the updated municipal paperwork would mandate an automatic 10 to 14-day delay. At exactly 4:45 in the afternoon, the digital alert fired. I received the blind copy in my Apex Holdings corporate inbox. The subject line read in stark black text, "Urgent, escrow suspension, title defect identified." The body of the email outlined the mandatory delay required for a new municipal survey. It stated that the target closing date was officially suspended pending resolution. Gregory Pierce received it. Brenda received it. I sat in my quiet apartment listening to the rain tap against the glass. Somewhere across town, in a house filled with catered food and expensive champagne, a smartphone vibrated. Brenda would look at the screen expecting a text from a friend, congratulating her on the party. Instead, she would read a legal notice, halting her payday. The celebration was over. The financial squeeze was officially active. Marcus needed that capital by the middle of December to secure his commercial lease. Chloe needed it to pay off the credit cards they maxed out. Brenda needed it to cover her fabricated estate debts. They built an empire on a shifting foundation. I just pulled the cornerstone. The long holiday weekend passed in a state of suspended animation. The email notification halting the escrow process sat in the inbox of Gregory Pierce like an unexploded ordnance. Because I executed the maneuver on Thanksgiving afternoon, the real estate broker could not initiate any countermeasures. Municipal offices remain closed during federal holidays. Independent surveyors do not answer their phones. Gregory and his clients were forced to sit in the dark and wait for Monday morning. When regular business hours resumed, the reality of the title defect settled over them. A boundary dispute involving a municipal utility easement requires physical intervention. A licensed city contractor must visit the site. They must pull the archival blueprints from the 1980s. They must manually measure the parcel lines and file an updated topographical report with the county clerk. During the month of December, the backlog for these municipal services often stretches for weeks. The title company updated the projected timeline. They estimated a 10 to 14-day mandatory freeze on all transaction progress. In the world of high finance, a 2-week delay represents a minor logistical annoyance. A solvent corporation simply parks the capital in an interest-bearing account and waits. But for individuals running a high-stakes bridge loan scheme, a 14-day delay functions as a fatal blow. Time is the only currency they truly lacked. I sat in my downtown office and charted their financial liabilities on a blank spreadsheet. I mapped the exact coordinates of their impending ruin. Marcus possessed the most critical exposure. He signed the commercial lease for his 10,000-square-foot climate-controlled logistics facility prior to Thanksgiving. Commercial landlords operate on ruthless metrics. They demand a substantial security deposit and the first month of rent up front. The lease agreement stipulated that Marcus must deliver the certified bank wire by December 20th to take possession of the building. If he missed that deadline, the landlord held the legal right to void the contract and retain any earnest money already submitted. His secondary liabilities compounded the crisis. He drove a brand-new German sport utility vehicle off a dealership lot weeks ago. The standard grace period for the first automotive installment typically spans 30 days. That bill was coming due. Chloe faced her own tightening vice. She funded the extravagant catered holiday party using revolving credit lines. She purchased designer silk dresses and imported champagne, assuming the Deschutes County property would close on the 1st of December. The credit card billing cycles were turning over. The minimum payments were generating late fees. They constructed a fragile empire of debt. They relied entirely on a phantom corporate entity to fund their lifestyle. Apex Holdings just pulled the structural support out from under their feet. The pressure began to suffocate them. I did not need to monitor their private conversations to understand their panic. I merely waited for the inevitable scramble for secondary capital. Desperate people always return to the resources they previously discarded. On the second Tuesday of December, my encrypted phone vibrated on my desk. The screen displayed my mother name. I picked up the device and pressed the green icon. "Hello, Mom." She did not bother with pleasantries. Her breathing sounded shallow and rapid. The manufactured grief she projected via text message the week prior vanished. Genuine terror replaced it. "Nanda," she said, her voice pitched higher than normal. "I need your help. It is an emergency." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I kept my tone soft and regulated. "What is happening? Are you safe?" "It is my health," she stammered. "I did not want to tell you because you are always so busy with work. I had some tests done last month. The doctors found an issue with my heart. They need to perform an urgent procedure this week." I listened to the fabrication unfold. The lie was audacious, but poorly constructed. "My health insurance denied the primary claim," she continued. The words spilled from her mouth in a frantic rush. "They classified the surgery as experimental. The hospital requires a $15,000 cash deposit before they will even admit me. I do not have that kind of liquidity right now because the estate is tied up in probate. I need a temporary emergency loan, Nanda. I will pay you back the second the lawyers release Grandma funds." She needed $15,000. That specific figure likely represented the exact amount Marcus lacked for his commercial warehouse deposit. She was attempting to extract the capital from my savings account to save her son-in-law from defaulting on his business lease. She utilized a fictitious cardiac emergency to manipulate my empathy. I looked at the Willamette River through my office window. The water flowed dark and steady. "That sounds terrifying, Mom," I replied. I injected a carefully calibrated note of deep concern into my voice. "Of course I want to ensure you get the medical care you need. We cannot delay a heart procedure." "Oh, thank you, Nanda," she exhaled. The relief in her tone was palpable. She thought she secured the lifeline. "I can give you my checking account routing numbers right now." I held up a hand even though she could not see me. "We do not need to route it through your personal account," I said. "My wealth management firm enforces strict compliance regulations regarding personal capital transfers exceeding $10,000. The federal banking laws require documentation to prevent fraud." "What kind of documentation?" she asked. The relief evaporated, replaced by a sharp edge of hesitation. "It is a simple process," I assured her. "I just need you to send me the official medical billing statement from the hospital. I also require the formal denial letter from your health insurance provider for my tax records. Once you email me those 2 PDF files, I will wire the $15,000 directly to the hospital billing department today. You will not have to worry about a thing." Silence descended on the line. I listened to the static. I trapped her in a logical corner. She could not produce a medical invoice that did not exist. She could not forge an insurance denial letter capable of passing a rudimentary corporate audit. If she admitted she lacked the paperwork, the entire cardiac narrative would collapse. "Nanda," she stammered, "the hospital is being very difficult about releasing the paperwork. The administration office is chaotic. It might take days to get those files." "I cannot authorize the wire transfer without the corresponding invoices, Mom. It is a strict regulatory requirement to protect both of us. Tell the hospital administration that your daughter is a senior wealth manager ready to clear the balance today. They will expedite the files. Just forward them to my email." More silence followed. The weight of her own deception crushed her. She realized the daughter she viewed as a naive resource possessed safeguards she could not bypass. "I will call them back," she whispered. Her voice sounded hollow. "I will let you know what they say." She terminated the connection. The line went dead. I set the phone down. She never called back. She never sent a medical file. She simply absorbed the defeat. The month of December marched forward. The 15th arrived, bringing the deadline for the commercial warehouse deposit. Marcus missed the payment. The landlord likely voided his lease and retained his initial application fees. His logistics startup suffered a critical operational failure. His expansion plans crumbled into dust. The financial vice tightened further. The stress within their household must have reached a boiling point. They were trapped. They remained entirely reliant on the faceless LLC. Gregory Pierce sent daily emails to my broker Robert, pleading for updates on the boundary survey. Gregory expressed deep concern that his sellers were facing unforeseen financial hardships. Robert forwarded the messages to me. We offered them nothing but silence. We let them sit in the dark and contemplate their empty bank accounts. On the morning of December 22nd, David called my secure line. The municipal surveyor filed the updated topographical report. David announced the utility easement resides safely outside the cedar structure boundary. The title is clear. We are legally authorized to proceed with the transaction. Excellent work, David, I replied. Lift the suspension. Inform the title company that Apex Holdings is ready to fund the escrow account. I will transmit the authorization immediately. Do you have a preference for the final signing schedule? The documents required physical signatures and formal notarization. The transition of the deed demanded a specific chronological sequence. I checked my calendar. Instruct Robert to coordinate with Gregory Pierce, I said. Mandate that the final closing documents be signed and the wire transfer authorization executed on the morning of December 24th. Christmas Eve, David noted. His tone reflected a quiet understanding of the tactical choice. The banks will process the final recording just before the holiday closure. Precisely, I stated. They will sign away the property in the morning. They will expect the funds to clear the following business day. I disconnected the call. The board was set. The waiting game was officially over. I possessed the clear title. I controlled the escrow. My family believed they finally secured their payday just in time for the holiday. They planned to gather on Christmas Eve and celebrate their successful heist. They had no idea the collision course was locked and the impact was mere hours away. December 23rd arrived with a sharp drop in temperature across the Pacific Northwest. Frost coated the windows of my downtown Portland office. The final stage of any real estate acquisition is the physical walkthrough. In the commercial wealth sector, you never authorize the release of funds based on a promise. You verify the condition of the asset matches the parameters established in the contract. Because Apex Holdings LLC required strict anonymity, I could not travel to Bend to inspect the Cedar House myself. Instead, my broker Robert dispatched a proxy representative from his firm. His name was Carter. Carter specialized in high-value property transitions. He possessed a meticulous eye for detail and a zero-tolerance policy for contractual deviations. I sat at my desk drinking a cup of hot black tea, waiting for his report. Carter arrived at the Deschutes County property at 9 in the morning. He utilized a digital lockbox code provided by Gregory Pierce to gain entry. The terms of our purchase agreement mandated a standard broom-clean condition upon transfer. This legal phrasing dictates that the seller must remove all personal property, sweep the floors, and leave the premises free of debris. It prevents a seller from treating the sold property as a personal landfill on their way out the door. At 9:45, my encrypted phone illuminated. Carter uploaded a secure photographic dossier to the Apex Holdings portal. I opened the file and began reviewing the visual data. The interior of the house passed inspection. Brenda and Chloe removed the sterile rental furniture. The hardwood floors appeared swept. The kitchen counters were wiped down. They fulfilled the baseline requirements for the primary living spaces. Then I clicked on the gallery folder labeled Exterior Garage. The image loaded on my high-resolution monitor. My jaw tightened. The detached two-car garage was transformed into a sprawling accumulation of refuse. It looked as though my family emptied 3 decades of neglected storage directly onto the concrete floor. The photographs documented a chaotic pile of heavy, rotting junk. I identified a decaying mattress stained with rust. Stacked against the far wall sat broken pieces of particle board furniture, shattered ceramic planters, and ruptured cardboard boxes spilling damp paperwork. Several heavy automotive parts rested near the center of the pile. I recognized them as components Marcus likely stripped from an old project vehicle and abandoned years ago. Black industrial trash bags sat clustered in the corners, leaking unidentified dark fluids onto the foundation. This was not an oversight. People do not accidentally leave 1,000 pounds of garbage in a garage during a move. This was a deliberate, calculated act of spite. Brenda and Chloe harbored deep resentment over the $60,000 deduction I extracted for the toxic fungal bloom. They felt outmaneuvered by the anonymous corporate buyer. Because they could not fight the mold remediation, they chose a petty method of retaliation. They intentionally dumped the most heavy, hazardous, and difficult-to-move items into the garage, assuming the faceless LLC would be forced to absorb the disposal costs after the closing. They thought they could strike a minor blow against a wealthy Seattle investment firm. They failed to realize they were just handing me another legal weapon. I picked up my phone and dialed Carter. He answered immediately. "Ms. Knight," he said. His voice carried a tone of professional disdain. As you can see from the uploads, the exterior structure fails the broom clean contingency. The sheer volume of the refuse constitutes a commercial disposal liability. "Halt the sign-off, Carter," I instructed. "Do not approve the condition report." "Already done," he confirmed. I informed the listing agent that the walkthrough is officially suspended pending resolution of the debris. I ended the call and dialed David. My corporate attorney answered with his customary efficiency. "We have a breach of the broom clean clause," I told him. "The sellers abandoned a commercial-scale load of hazardous junk in the garage. They are attempting to stick Apex Holdings with the cleanup fee." David sighed. The predictable spite of a cornered seller. "How do you want to address it, Fernanda?" "Draft an emergency escrow holdback," I said. "I want $5,000 deducted from their final proceeds. The funds will cover a rapid response commercial junk removal crew and any potential chemical cleaning required for the concrete floor. Inform Gregory Pierce that if his clients do not sign this addendum within 1 hour, we cancel the transaction entirely." $5,000 is a steep premium for junk removal, David noted. "It is an inconvenience tax," I replied. "Send the ultimatum." The legal machinery engaged for the final time. The addendum flew across the digital servers, landing directly in the inbox of Gregory Pierce. Gregory possessed the unfortunate task of delivering the news to Brenda. 20 minutes later, Carter sent me a text update from his vehicle parked outside the Bend property. Carter observed Gregory pulling his luxury crossover into the driveway. Brenda followed closely behind in her sedan. Gregory presented the $5,000 penalty document on his tablet. According to Carter, the interaction rapidly deteriorated. Brenda lost her composure entirely. She stood in the freezing driveway, waving her arms and shouting at the real estate agent. The facade of the grieving cooperative seller shattered. She realized the faceless corporation she attempted to spite just outplayed her again, stripping another layer of profit from her anticipated payday. She yelled about unfair practices. She likely threatened to walk away from the deal, but her leverage remained non-existent. She was suffocating under the weight of her own financial mismanagement. Chloe needed the cash to satisfy revolving credit lines. Marcus was already drowning after losing his commercial warehouse lease. If Brenda tanked this closing over a garbage dispute, they would walk away with zero liquidity right before a major holiday. She possessed no choice. The trap held her tight. At 10:45 a.m., Carter sent a final message. The seller signed the concession. The condition report is approved. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of tea. The taste felt rich and grounding. I utilized their own vindictive behavior to legally extract the exact funds necessary to clean my grandmother property. Every move they made out of greed or spite only strengthened my position. The timeline shifted to the final sequence. December 24th arrived. Christmas Eve morning broke with clear skies over Portland. The corporate offices operated on a skeleton crew, managing the half-day schedule before the holiday shutdown. I arrived at my desk at 8 in the morning wearing a tailored blazer. The final paperwork routed through the title company digital portal. The escrow officer finalized the accounting ledger, subtracting the $60,000 mold remediation and the $5,000 disposal fee from the final seller payout. The remaining balance was staged for wire transfer. At 11:30, the settlement statement crossed my desk for a final authorization signature. I verified the numbers. I signed the document using my electronic corporate seal. I authorized the bank to release the funds from the Apex Holdings Trust account. I watched the dual monitors on my workstation. The software tracked the progress of the wire in real time. The digital packets moved through the federal banking system. The county clerk office in Bend received the electronic notification. At precisely 12 noon, the timestamp on my screen updated. The status indicator shifted to a bright, solid green. Recorded and closed. I exhaled a long, slow breath. The tension that resided in my shoulders for the past 2 months dissolved. The deed to the Cedar House overlooking the Pines transitioned into the secure holding of my corporate entity. As of noon on Christmas Eve, Fernanda Knight stood as the sole legal owner of her grandmother estate. My mother and sister thought they executed a brilliant covert operation. They thought they liquidated a family asset behind my back. Instead, they spent weeks jumping through my legal hoops, enduring my financial penalties, and ultimately handing the property straight into my portfolio. My encrypted phone vibrated on the polished wood of my desk. I picked up the device. The screen displayed a new notification from my personal messaging application. It was a group text initiated by Brenda. The recipient list included Chloe Marcus and myself. I opened the thread. Nanda Honey, Brenda wrote. Her tone shifted back to the saccharine, manufactured warmth she utilized when she felt victorious. I know things have been difficult and stressful with the estate lately, but it is Christmas Eve, and family is the most important thing in the world. Chloe and Marcus are coming over for a special holiday dinner tonight at my house. We are serving prime rib. Please come join us. We have so much to be thankful for and so much to celebrate. I read the words twice. The audacity was breathtaking. The wire transfer hit her bank account minutes ago. She saw the influx of cash. She felt wealthy again. She invited me to dinner not out of love, but out of a desire to gloat. She wanted me to sit at her table eating her food while she silently reveled in the secret fortune she believed she just secured. She wanted an audience for her triumph. I smiled. The cold, calculated smile of a professional who just closed the most satisfying acquisition of her career. I tapped the reply button. I would love to come, Mom, I typed. See you tonight. I placed the phone in my pocket and gathered my coat. I had a dinner to attend. The board was cleared. The pieces were collected. It was time to show them exactly who bought the house. The drive to the suburbs took 45 minutes. The winter sun dipped below the Oregon horizon early, leaving the residential streets illuminated by elaborate holiday displays. I parked my vehicle along the curb outside a 2-story colonial home. The property belonged to Brenda. She retained it after my father passed away a decade ago. It served as the central hub for our family gatherings. I stepped onto the frozen pavement and assessed the driveway. Marcus parked his leased German sport utility vehicle at an arrogant angle, taking up 2 spaces. The silver paint gleamed under the porch light. He intentionally positioned the car so every arriving guest would immediately recognize his newly acquired status symbol. It stood as a 2-ton monument to premature celebration. I walked up the concrete path and pressed the doorbell. The heavy wooden door swung open. A wave of warm air carrying the rich scent of roasted prime rib and expensive garlic butter washed over me. Brenda stood in the entryway holding a crystal wine glass. She wore a tailored crimson dress that draped elegantly over her frame. Her neck showcased a fresh strand of pearls. "Nanda," she said, her voice pitched into a theatrical register of delight. "You made it! Come inside out of the cold." She leaned forward and delivered a hollow embrace. Her cheek barely grazed mine. She smelled of premium department store perfume and champagne. She ushered me into the foyer, taking my keys and pointing toward the living room. The interior of the house hummed with the loud, overlapping chatter of extended relatives. I recognized Aunt Patricia and Uncle Thomas sitting on the leather sofa. A few cousins stood near the fireplace holding small plates of artisan cheeses. The atmosphere felt distinctly different from previous holidays. In past years, a subtle tension always permeated these gatherings. Everyone usually complained about the rising cost of living or mundane workplace politics. Tonight, the room vibrated with a synthetic electric energy. It was the distinct frequency of unearned wealth. I handed my coat to Brenda and stepped into the main entertaining space. My eyes immediately located Chloe. My younger sister stood near the kitchen island, laughing loudly at a joke someone just delivered. She wore a fitted velvet gown that looked fresh off a boutique mannequin. As she turned her head, the overhead recessed lighting caught the jewelry resting on her earlobes. She wore a pair of significant diamond stud earrings. The stones were large enough to reflect sharp prisms of light across the room. I mentally appraised them. Given the clarity and carat weight, those stones retailed for several $1,000s. Chloe lacked the disposable income to purchase high-end jewelry. Her lifestyle blog generated minimal revenue. She financed that purchase on credit. The earrings represented a psychological coping mechanism. The escrow process tested her patience and frayed her nerves. She endured the $60,000 penalty and the agonizing boundary survey delay. To soothe her financial anxiety, she engaged in retail therapy. She bought the diamonds to physically manifest the wealth she believed was currently sitting in the title company trust account. Marcus stood a few feet away, holding court with Uncle Thomas. Thomas ran a mid-sized regional hardware chain and prided himself on conservative fiscal management. Marcus leaned against the counter, holding a glass of dark liquor, gesturing broadly with his free hand. "The logistics sector is all about timing," Thomas Marcus proclaimed, his voice carried across the room, designed for maximum audience penetration. "You have to know when to pivot. We experienced a slight delay with our new warehouse acquisition last week, but I utilized the gap to renegotiate favorable terms. The capital injection hits the ledger on Tuesday. We are positioned for explosive growth in the first quarter." I listened to his monologue with a serene expression. His capacity for self-deception bordered on pathological. He did not renegotiate favorable terms. He missed his commercial deposit deadline because the property boundary objection froze the escrow. The landlord likely terminated his lease and kept his application fees. Marcus stood in front of his conservative uncle, spinning a catastrophic business failure into a narrative of strategic genius. He anchored his entire fabricated reality on the assumption that the Bend property funds would wire into his account on Tuesday. Tuesday was December 26th, the first business day after the holiday. They all believed the fortune was locked. They signed the final settlement statement that morning. In their minds, the transaction was a historical fact. The buyer possessed the deed, and they possessed the cash. They merely waited for the federal banking system to reopen and route the digital packets into their checking accounts. Brenda walked up beside me. She handed me a flute of sparkling cider, knowing I preferred to avoid heavy alcohol during family events. "It is a beautiful party, Mom," I told her, keeping my tone polite and conversational. "The food smells incredible." She smiled, taking a sip of her champagne. "We decided to spare no expense this year. It has been a challenging season for the family. We deserved a proper celebration." She stepped back and scanned my outfit. I wore a bespoke charcoal wool sweater paired with dark tailored trousers. The garments lacked visible designer logos. I value precise tailoring and premium fabric over flashy branding. To a woman like Brenda, who equates wealth with conspicuous consumption, my attire signaled a lack of financial means. Her eyes lingered on the hem of my sweater. She offered a soft, pitying sigh. "You know, Nanda," she murmured, keeping her voice low enough to simulate intimacy, but loud enough for Aunt Patricia to overhear. "I noticed your winter coat when you handed it to me. The elbows look a bit worn. You work so many hours at that firm, but you always look like you are struggling to keep your head above water." She reached out and patted my shoulder, a gesture dripping with condescension. "Once the estate matters are fully settled next week, I am going to take you shopping," she declared. "I want to buy you a proper designer coat. You should not have to walk around downtown Portland looking so modest. It breaks my heart to see you neglecting yourself." I held my glass of cider. I looked directly into her eyes. She was offering me charity, funded by my own inheritance. She stood in a house she financed through my father, wearing pearls she bought with my grandmother estate, offering to clothe her successful daughter out of sheer pity. She relegated me to the role of the pathetic, excluded sibling who missed out on the financial windfall of a lifetime. She required this dynamic to validate her own choices. If I was a struggling modest worker, her theft felt justified. She convinced herself she deserved the money because she knew how to spend it properly. I did not bristle. I did not defend my income or my wardrobe. Defensiveness implies insecurity. "That is very generous of you, Mom," I said. A warm, serene smile touched the corners of my mouth. "I am sure next week will bring a lot of changes for all of us." She beamed, interpreting my response as gratitude. She patted my shoulder one last time and floated away to check on the catering staff she hired to slice the prime rib. I took a slow sip of the crisp cider. The dramatic irony in the room felt dense enough to cut with a blade. Every conversation, every boast, every glittering piece of new jewelry relied on a foundational premise that I had already destroyed. I pictured the finalized settlement statement locked in my secure digital portal. I pictured the digital timestamp reading 12 noon. Apex Holdings, LLC, was not a Seattle investment firm. Apex Holdings, LLC, was the woman standing in the corner wearing the charcoal sweater. I held the deed to the property. I authorized the transfer of the funds. The money they were mentally spending to pay off the leased SUV and the diamond earrings belonged to a trust account they could no longer access. The dining room chimes rang. Brenda stood at the head of the long mahogany table, signaling the guests to take their seats. The table setting mirrored the extravagance of the evening. Heavy silver cutlery rested beside fine porcelain plates. Tall crystal wine glasses caught the flickering light of a dozen tapered candles. A massive prime rib roast anchored the center of the spread, surrounded by roasted root vegetables and artisanal breads. Chloe took a seat near the center, pulling her chair in close. Marcus sat beside her, adjusting his expensive watch. The extended relatives filled out the remaining spots, laughing and passing the serving platters. I walked toward the single, empty chair situated near the opposite end of the table. I took my seat, observing the faces of my family. They looked relaxed. They looked secure. The tension of the prolonged escrow period evaporated from their posture. They survived the mold penalty. They survived the boundary delay. They survived the hazardous waste extraction. They believed the finish line was in the rear-view mirror. Brenda picked up a heavy silver carving knife. She tapped her crystal glass with a fork. The sharp, ringing sound commanded the attention of the room. The conversations faded into a respectful silence. The table was set. The audience was captive. The climax was primed. Brenda lowered the heavy silver carving knife. She welcomed the extended relatives to the table with a sweeping gesture. The catering staff immediately stepped forward, carrying large porcelain platters. They served thick cuts of roasted beef alongside miniature potatoes and glazed carrots. I placed a linen napkin on my lap and watched my family consume the extravagant feast. Helen never hired private chefs for the holidays. My grandmother believed preparing a meal transferred affection directly into the food. Brenda operated on a different philosophy. She believed serving expensive dishes transferred dominance to the host. The main course stretched across an agonizing hour. The dining room filled with the sounds of clinking silverware and overlapping conversations. Marcus dominated the dialogue near the center of the table. He consumed 3 glasses of heavy red wine and began lecturing Uncle Thomas on commercial real estate trends. He used industry terminology incorrectly. He threw around words like amortization and capitalization rates without understanding the underlying math. I ate my dinner in silence. I manage 9-figure asset portfolios. Listening to Marcus pretend to understand commercial leasing felt like watching a toddler explain quantum physics. Aunt Patricia turned toward me from the adjacent seat. She asked how my job at the wealth management firm was progressing. Before I could provide a modest answer, Brenda intercepted the question from across the table. She projected her voice over the ambient noise. "Nanda works very hard, Patricia," Brenda interjected. "She is just a dedicated employee. But the real excitement is happening with Chloe and Marcus. They are about to enter an entirely different tax bracket." Chloe smiled, resting her hand on her husband's arm. The candlelight hit her new diamond earrings. She looked across the table at me. Her expression held a mixture of pity and superiority. "We are just focusing on building generational wealth," Chloe stated. "It takes bold moves to secure a legacy. You have to know when to strike." I took a sip of my sparkling cider. I agreed with her statement entirely. Securing a legacy does require bold moves. It requires setting up an untraceable Delaware corporation and forcing your greedy sister to pay a $60,000 penalty for toxic mold. The catering staff cleared the heavy dinner plates. They brought out a decadent chocolate dessert accompanied by fresh espresso. The room felt warm and thick with digestion. The electric energy of unearned wealth reached its maximum limit. They survived the meal. They proved their status to the extended relatives. Now Brenda needed to deliver her grand finale. She could not keep her secret any longer. The desire to gloat burned too hot inside her chest. She needed to publicly humiliate me to validate her own theft. She picked up her fork and tapped it against her crystal glass a second time. The sharp ringing sound commanded immediate silence. Everyone turned their attention to the head of the table. Brenda stood up, holding her champagne. She looked directly down the length of the mahogany wood until her eyes locked onto mine. Her lips curled upward. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across her face. She looked like a woman who believed she just won a marathon without realizing she ran in the wrong direction. "We have a special announcement," Brenda proudly proclaimed to the table. She did not break eye contact with me. "We finally sold Grandma House. You were never in the will anyway." A collective gasp rippled through the extended relatives. Uncle Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Aunt Patricia looked down at her lap. They knew the history. They knew I spent 41 weekends driving to Bend to bathe the woman who built that home. Hearing a mother proudly announce the disinheritance of her own daughter shocked the guests. Chloe laughed. The sound echoed sharp and cruel in the quiet dining room. "Good," she added. She would have just wasted it. The air in the room turned stagnant. Everyone waited for my reaction. They expected me to burst into tears. They expected me to stand up and scream about unfairness. They anticipated a dramatic emotional meltdown. Brenda wanted a screaming match so she could call me unstable and justify her actions. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not move a single muscle in anger. I calmly placed my glass on the table. I picked up my linen napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth with slow, deliberate precision. I folded the fabric and set it next to my dessert plate. I looked back at Brenda. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds. "Cool," I said. My voice emerged flat and clinical. "Hope you enjoy the cash since I am the one who bought it." The table went deathly silent. The ambient noise of the house vanished. Even the catering staff standing near the kitchen doorway froze in place. Brenda's smug smile locked onto her face like a frozen mask. The triumph in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by a sudden, creeping confusion. She stared at me, unable to process the vocabulary I just utilized. Her brain rejected the information. Chloe broke the silence. She leaned forward, gripping the edge of the mahogany table. Her face flushed red. "What are you talking about?" Chloe demanded. Her voice cracked, losing its polished tone. "You do not have that kind of capital. We sold the property to a corporate investment firm in Seattle. We sold it to Apex Holdings." I reached down to the floor beside my chair. I picked up my leather work bag. I unfastened the top clasp and pulled out a sleek manila folder. The thick paper contained the final, unredacted settlement documents executed by the title company earlier that morning. I tossed the folder onto the center of the table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping directly in front of Marcus. "Read page 4, I instructed. Marcus picked up the folder. His hands trembled slightly. He flipped open the cover and turned to the final closing disclosure. The document detailed the exact financial breakdown of the transaction. It showed the original purchase price. It documented the $60,000 deduction for the biohazard remediation. It listed the $5,000 penalty for the garage debris. And at the very bottom of the page, it displayed the authorized signature of the buyer. Marcus stared at the ink. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a pale ashen color. He looked like a man who just stepped off a cliff in the dark. "Read it aloud, Marcus," I commanded. "Let everyone hear who funded your new car." He swallowed hard. His vocal cords tightened. "Apex Holdings, LLC," he read. His voice barely registered above a whisper. "Signed by Fernanda Knight, sole managing member." The psychological devastation swept through the room with the force of a physical shockwave. Chloe collapsed back into her chair. Her hands flew to her mouth, covering a silent gasp. The diamond earrings caught the light again, but they no longer looked like symbols of wealth. They looked like heavy, unpaid liabilities. Brenda slowly sank into her seat at the head of the table. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers and tipped over, spilling expensive liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. She did not notice the mess. She stared at the manila folder with wide, terrified eyes. They realized they did not outsmart a stranger. They were thoroughly outplayed by the daughter they viewed as a naive servant. The faceless corporate entity that squeezed them for every ounce of leverage was sitting right in front of them, eating chocolate dessert. The corporate buyer who forced Brenda to hire a structural inspector was me. The buyer who discovered their fraudulent attempt to paint over toxic mold was me. The entity that extracted a $60,000 concession from their profits was me. The anonymous client who stalled the boundary survey, causing Marcus to lose his commercial warehouse lease, was me. The buyer who penalized them $5,000 for leaving junk in the garage was me. I orchestrated every single moment of their financial misery over the past 2 months. I pulled the strings. I built the trap. I set the timeline. They spent weeks hating a phantom Seattle corporation. They spent weeks cursing the name Apex Holdings. Now the realization crashed over them that they were cursing my name. I held the deed to the property. I controlled the narrative. The extended relatives remained entirely motionless. Uncle Thomas stared at me with newfound reverence. He recognized a ruthless business maneuver when he saw one. He knew Marcus was a fraud, but he just witnessed me execute a flawless hostile takeover against my own mother. Brenda finally found her voice. It emerged as a high-pitched, breathless wheeze. "You," she whispered, pointing a shaking finger down the length of the table, "you bought the house. You forced those penalties on us." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "Yes, Mom, I did," I replied. "I acquired the asset. I conducted standard due diligence. You attempted to commit real estate fraud by concealing a toxic fungal infestation. I simply utilized the legal system to hold you accountable for your deception." "But the wire transfer," Chloe stammered, pointing at the empty air. "The money cleared today. We got the cash. We won." I looked at my sister. The delusion still clung to her desperate mind. She thought the presence of a pending deposit in her account meant she escaped the consequences. She thought the game ended at noon. She did not understand the intricate layers of contract law. She did not realize the final trap was currently rolling down the hill directly toward her fragile empire. I prepared to deliver the ultimate checkmate. The dining room erupted into a cacophony of overlapping voices. Aunt Patricia gasped again, while Uncle Thomas pushed his chair back from the table as if trying to distance himself from the blast radius. Brenda stood up, her hands flat on the mahogany surface, leaning forward with a frantic energy. She tried to reclaim control of the narrative. "It does not matter who bought it," Brenda declared. Her voice shook, but she forced a tone of defiance. "A sale is a sale, Nanda. You signed the paperwork. The title company authorized the transaction. The funds are pending in our primary checking account right now. They clear on Tuesday morning. You just paid us $800,000 for a house we got for free. You think you won, but you just handed us a fortune." Chloe nodded, rapidly grasping at her mother logic. "Exactly," Chloe added. She touched her diamond earrings again, seeking comfort in the physical object. "You gave us the capital. We are rich. You are just bitter." I looked at the two women. They possessed a rudimentary understanding of banking protocols. They saw a pending notification on a mobile banking application and assumed the digital digits represented untouchable physical currency. They did not understand the mechanisms of corporate escrow, holding accounts, or the legal triggers that can freeze them. I reached down to the floor for a second time. Next to my leather work bag sat a structured carrying tote I brought inside under the guise of carrying holiday gifts. I unzipped the top compartment. I reached inside and pulled out the archival box. I placed the box in the center of the table, right next to the remaining prime rib. I removed the lid. I reached inside and pulled out the carved block of raw cedar. The brass mechanical movement caught the ambient candlelight. The sanded wood gleamed. I set Helen Clock directly in front of my sister. Chloe stopped breathing. The color drained from her face faster than it fled from Marcus earlier. Her eyes widened in pure terror. "You left the property vacant during the escrow period," I said, keeping my voice measured and calm. "You assumed the anonymous buyer would not notice missing inventory, but the purchase and sale agreement you signed explicitly included all fixtures and major decor present at the time of the initial offer." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. I placed it on top of the manila settlement folder. "This is a receipt from a high-end antique dealer in downtown Portland," I explained. "It details the transaction of a stolen asset during an active escrow. It bears your signature, Chloe. You pawned a family heirloom for $1,200 to pay the drive-off fees for a leased German sport utility vehicle. That constitutes theft and a direct breach of a legally binding real estate contract." Chloe shrank back into her chair. She looked at Marcus, who stared at the cedar clock with a hollow expression. He realized his new car was funded by stolen property. Brenda tried to interject. "That is just a clock, Nanda. It is a minor detail. You cannot undo a real estate closing over a piece of wood. The money is already routing to our bank." I turned my gaze to my mother. "The clock is just the secondary violation, Mom. The primary violation belongs to you." I pulled a second document from my blazer pocket. It was a printed copy of the email thread between Brenda and Gregory Pierce. "During the inspection phase, my licensed contractor discovered a severe biohazard in the basement," I stated. "You attempted to conceal a toxic fungal infestation behind a fresh coat of cosmetic paint. When the report flagged the decay, you sent a written message to your listing agent. You offered him a $5,000 cash bribe to alter a legally mandated environmental disclosure." Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She looked at the printed email. She knew the exact words she typed on that keyboard. "That is not a minor contractual oversight," I continued. "That is documented real estate fraud. You attempted to induce a buyer into acquiring a toxic asset through active deception." "The escrow officer cleared the wire," Brenda whispered. Her defiance crumbled into raw panic. "The transaction is done." "The transaction is suspended," I corrected her. "In the state of Oregon, the discovery of fraud allows a buyer to initiate emergency judicial intervention. At 11:30 this morning, my corporate attorney filed a formal injunction with the county court. He filed a lis pendens against the disbursement of the settlement funds." I watched the realization hit their eyes. The pending status on their mobile banking application was not a processing delay. It was a legal freeze. "The title company received the court order at 11:45, I explained, outlining the precise timeline. "The money you are expecting on Tuesday is not routing to your checking account. It is locked inside a secure judicial trust. It will remain frozen indefinitely, pending a full state investigation into your fraudulent concealment and Chloe documented theft." The silence in the dining room became suffocating. The reality of their financial checkmate descended upon them like a concrete vault. Marcus placed his hands on top of his head. His fingers dug into his scalp. He breathed in ragged, shallow gasps. "The warehouse," Marcus muttered, talking to himself. "The landlord gave me an extension until the 26th. He said if the wire did not hit on Tuesday, he is terminating the lease and keeping the application capital. "Your logistics company is insolvent, Marcus," I stated, confirming his nightmare. "You leveraged your entire operational budget on an unearned windfall. When Tuesday arrives, you will default on your commercial lease. Your new vehicle will face repossession before the end of January because you cannot make the first installment. Your entire business model relied on my grandmother estate." Chloe began to weep. The sound was high and desperate. She reached up and touched the diamond earrings. She bought them on credit, assuming the escrow funds would wipe the balance clean. Now those stones represented an insurmountable debt she possessed no means to satisfy. She faced retail credit card interest rates exceeding 20%, with zero income to service the principal. Brenda slumped in her chair. The regal posture she maintained all evening vanished. She looked like a hollow shell. She orchestrated the removal of her own daughter from a will to secure a fast fortune. She lied about medical emergencies. She tried to bribe a broker. She maneuvered and plotted for months, only to end up with her assets frozen in a legal trust she could not touch. "You planned this?" Brenda choked out. Tears ruined her expensive makeup, streaking dark lines down her cheeks. "You set us up. You ruined your own family over a house." "I did not force you to paint over the mold, Mom," I replied. My tone remained devoid of sympathy. "I did not force Chloe to pawn the clock. I did not force Marcus to sign a commercial lease he could not afford. You ruined yourselves through your own entitlement. I simply purchased an asset and demanded strict adherence to the contract." I stood up from the table. I picked up the cedar clock and placed it back inside the archival box. I did not take the manila folder or the printed emails. I left the evidence resting on the mahogany wood for the extended relatives to examine. Uncle Thomas watched me with a silent nod. He understood the brutal efficiency of the outcome. He knew I operated within the strict parameters of the law. I walked into the foyer and retrieved my tailored wool coat from the hall closet. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and adjusted the collar. The fabric felt warm and protective. Brenda stumbled out of the dining room, leaning against the doorframe for support. "Nanda, please," she begged. The arrogance was gone, replaced by sheer terror. "We can fix this. We can renegotiate the terms. I will give you half the money. I will give you whatever you want. Just release the funds. We are going to lose everything." I opened the heavy front door. The freezing winter air swept into the foyer, cutting through the smell of the roasted dinner. "You already lost everything the moment you removed my name from the probate documents," I told her. "I do not want your money. I already own the house. And regarding the frozen escrow funds, the court will decide how much you owe in damages and legal fees." She reached a trembling hand toward me. "You cannot just walk away. We are your family." "My family lived in Bend," I said. "She is gone." I stepped onto the frozen porch and looked back at my mother one final time. "Do not call my phone," I instructed. "Do not send me text messages. If you attempt to contact me at my office, security will escort you off the premises. From this moment forward, any and all communication must go through my corporate attorney in Seattle. Have a Merry Christmas." I pulled the door shut behind me. The heavy wood clicked securely into the frame, sealing the chaos inside. I walked down the concrete path toward my vehicle. The frost crunched beneath my shoes. The neighborhood remained quiet, illuminated by the festive holiday lights. I unlocked my car and placed the archival box containing the cedar clock onto the passenger seat. I started the engine and turned on the heater. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline. I did not feel a sudden surge of joy. I felt the profound, steady satisfaction of a balanced ledger. I executed a flawless acquisition. I secured my heritage. I excised a toxic liability from my life. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the rented luxury vehicle and the false empire far behind me in the rearview mirror. January arrived in Oregon with a relentless, freezing rain. I spent the first 2 weeks of the new year immersed in first quarter portfolio projections for my corporate clients. My personal phone remained blissfully silent. I blocked my mother and my sister, on every digital platform before I drove away from that Christmas dinner. I instructed the security desk and the primary receptionist at my wealth management firm to flag their names. If they attempted to call the office, the receptionist routed them to a dead voicemail extension. I set a perimeter and enforced it with architectural precision. Any necessary updates regarding the Deschutes County property arrived via secure email from my attorney, David. The state investigation into the concealed fungal biohazard progressed swiftly. Faced with the printed, written evidence of a bribery attempt, Gregory Pierce retained independent counsel and severed all professional ties with Brenda. He surrendered every text message and email exchange to the state investigators to protect his own real estate license. Brenda possessed zero defense. The authorities levied significant civil fines against her for violating disclosure statutes. The financial dominoes fell exactly according to the mathematical models I charted in my office. On the second day of January, Marcus defaulted on his commercial lease agreement. The warehouse landlord retained the initial application capital and placed the facility back on the open market. Without the expanded square footage, Marcus lost his primary logistics contract. His startup entered a rapid, unrecoverable spiral of insolvency. His drivers quit. His vendors demanded immediate payment. 2 weeks later, a recovery agent arrived at their suburban rental home in the middle of the night. The agent attached a tow cable to the silver German sport utility vehicle and pulled it out of the driveway. Marcus missed the first installment. The dealership reclaimed the asset. Chloe faced her own tightening vice. The credit card statements arrived bearing the exorbitant charges for the catered holiday feast and the diamond earrings. The interest rates compounded daily. She lacked the liquid cash to service even the minimum payments. Their fabricated wealth dissolved, leaving nothing but crippling high-interest debt. The facade they projected to the world shattered. Brenda fared no better. The county court maintained the freeze on the escrow funds pending the final resolution of the fraud inquiry. Legal representation requires expensive upfront retainers. Brenda hired a defense attorney to navigate the state investigation and mitigate the fines. Because she lacked access to the property proceeds, she was forced to finance her legal fees utilizing the equity in her own home. The colonial house in the suburbs where she hosted her disastrous victory dinner hit the real estate market in late January. She downsized to a modest attached townhome on the far industrial edge of the city. Her manufactured debts transformed into genuine financial ruin. The capital she thought she secured from my grandmother estate bled away into legal penalties and attorney invoices. I did not concern myself with their descent. I focused my energy on the restoration of my heritage. On the third weekend in January, I drove back down Highway 26 towards Central Oregon. The sky held a crisp, clear blue tint unique to the high desert winter. Frost coated the tall pine needles lining the road. The Deschutes River flowed dark and steady beside the highway. I parked my vehicle in the driveway of the cedar-wrapped house. The exterior looked unchanged, but the foundational integrity was fully restored. During the escrow freeze, I dispatched a specialized commercial remediation crew to the property. I authorized a comprehensive extraction of the basement biohazard. The crew dismantled the rotting drywall, treated the structural studs with industrial fungicide, and installed a permanent moisture mitigation system. They eliminated the toxic threat Brenda tried to hide. I also hired a commercial hauling service to clear the vindictive accumulation of garbage from the detached garage. The concrete floor was swept clean and treated with a chemical degreaser. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled fresh and crisp. The sterile rental furniture was gone. The rooms stood empty, echoing with the quiet dignity of a blank slate. I walked through the main living room, tracing my hand along the original oak window frames. Helen loved this space. She built a life here. My family tried to erase that life for a fast wire transfer. I ensured her legacy remained intact. I walked back to my car and retrieved the archival box. I carried it into the house and walked straight toward the brick fireplace. I set the box on the hearth. I removed the lid and lifted the carved cedar clock. The sanded wood felt smooth and familiar against my palms. I stepped up to the mantelpiece. I reached out and removed the cheap geometric canvas my sister used to replace our history. I set the factory-produced art on the floor facing the wall. I placed the cedar clock precisely in the center of the mantel. I opened the small brass panel on the back of the wood and wound the mechanical movement. The internal gears caught. A steady, rhythmic ticking filled the silent room. The heartbeat of the house returned. I stepped back and looked at the clock. The pendulum swung in a perfect, unbroken arc. The past 2 months required intense strategic maneuvering. I navigated corporate shielding, executed strict contractual penalties, and engaged in tactical silence. True power does not manifest in screaming matches in a driveway. It does not require begging for inclusion at a table where you are not respected. True power stems from quiet competence. It requires flawless execution. It means stepping back and letting the established system do the heavy lifting. I did not raise my voice to defeat them. I let the rigidity of contract law and the inevitable consequences of their own greed dismantle their operation. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a cup of dark roast coffee. I poured the steaming liquid into a ceramic mug I brought from Portland. I walked out the back door and stepped onto the wraparound cedar deck. The air was sharp and cold. The pine trees swayed in the gentle winter breeze. I took a slow sip of the coffee. The heat warmed my chest. I looked out over the half-acre of land I now legally owned. My family believed they could use me as a disposable asset. They assumed my quiet nature indicated weakness. They mistook my professional composure for naive compliance. They learned a permanent lesson about the danger of underestimating the person who actually understands how the paper moves. I will never speak to Brenda Chloe or Marcus again. I did not cut them out of my life because I harbor a burning rage. Anger requires ongoing emotional investment. I cut them out of pure, unbothered self-respect. They simply no longer meet the behavioral requirements necessary to occupy space in my timeline. I am fully in control of my legacy. The estate belongs to the one person who earned it. That is my story, a masterclass in letting the paperwork do the talking. 41 weekends of caregiving, 1 anonymous corporation, and 0 apologies. If this resonated with you, take it as a sign to stop arguing with people who refuse to see your worth. Build your own fortress instead. Thank you for listening to QT Told Stories. Drop a comment below if you have ever used silence as your best weapon. And remember to hit subscribe so the next story finds you.